the real deal, an authentic follower of Jesus is someone who knows the truth, who walks in the truth, and who abides in the truth. Now, here's the thing about truth. We've already been looking at this and understanding that when we talk about truth in this regard, we are talking about three different kinds of truth. There is theological truth, that which the Scripture teaches about who God is and who Jesus is, about the gospel. There is moral truth, right and wrong. And there is relational truth, love one another. But I want to ask you a question. Is it possible to be intolerant of theological and moral error? In other words, to stand so firmly on knowing the truth and walking in the truth that you know what the truth is, and you oppose that which is not true. Is it possible to do that without committing relational error? Is it possible to stand for truth and still love one another? When there is someone who does not stand for the same truth that you stand for, what happens then? That is actually the issue that the Apostle John was beginning to address in the letter known as 2 John. And so we've looked at knowing the truth, and we've looked at walking in the truth. This morning we're going to look at abiding in truth. 2 John, beginning in verse 7. He writes this, "For many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is the deceiver and the Antichrist. So watch yourselves, so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a reward. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. For whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. For whoever greets him takes part in his wicked ways. Though I have much to write to you, I would rather not use paper and ink. Instead, I would hope to come to you and talk face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your elect sister greet you." Now, he's talking about there in verse 7 that there were deceivers who've gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. We've seen that before. He's already addressed this theological error in the book of 1 John. Two different places he addresses the problem of the false teachers and how they were hurting the church, that they had denied the fullness of Christ's deity and his humanity. And I started thinking about that. What constitutes a false teacher? It's easy to stand up here and preach and make a mistake. I can assure you, I could go back and read sermons from 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I would probably cringe at some of the things that I said. And would love the opportunity to go back and go, oh, if I had only thought that through a little bit more. But those are mistakes. It's one thing to make a theological mistake. It's quite another to intentionally deceive the church, to intentionally attempt to lead God's people away from the truth. John calls these kinds of people, he says, the deceiver. The deceiver. In fact, we see that word used twice just there in verse 7, the deceiver. Deceiver speaks to their actions, that they are seeking to pull one over on God's people. But he also calls them the Antichrist. The Antichrist, that speaks to their motivation. They oppose Christ. They are against the things of God. And so their motivation, because they are opposing Christ, their action is that they are deceiving the church. Can I tell you that is every pastor's worst nightmare? And the reason it is because Hebrews chapter 13 verse 17 says that we as pastors have the responsibility of keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Not to the deacons, although that is certainly involved as well, but that's not what the writer of Hebrews is referencing. He's talking about those who will have to give an account. For those of us who are pastors, those of us who are teachers of God's word, we will have to give an account before the Lord himself of how we shepherded his people. How we watched over them and helped them to know the truth and to walk in the truth and to abide in the truth. I remember several years ago when Joel Osteen's popularity was growing, he had just released his book, Your Best Life Now. Well, can I just tell you, that right there should have told you this is garbage. You can't have your best life now because your best life is in eternity. So he was focused on the wrong thing from the very beginning, but there's so much theological error in his teaching. But man, he made you feel good if you listened to him. I mean, you felt like you could get the best parking spot at Walmart. In fact, he actually said that one time, that if you're walking with God in the way that you should, you'll get the best parking spot at Walmart. Well, I'm not walking with the Lord, apparently. But when he released that book and was becoming really popular, we had a group of adults my age in the church I was serving at the time who wanted to go and see Joel Osteen. And I don't know if he was coming here to Birmingham or if he was going to Atlanta or if they were going to Houston. I don't know. I don't remember the details, but I do remember that I felt a responsibility as a pastor to teach truth as opposed to the error that they were hearing from listening to someone who, in my opinion, is a false teacher. That is the burden that the Apostle John was also carrying. He wrote this letter with the heart of a pastor. He said, I have much to write to you, but I would prefer to come see you face to face. I want to be able to help you navigate through what the false teachers have done and to help you to go on the right path to be where it is that God wants you to be. I have much to write to you, but I would rather come and tell you that face to face. But in the meantime, until I get there, he warned them about 3 dangers of not abiding in truth. First is the danger of going back. Because of these smooth-talking charlatans, as Eugene Peterson calls them, because these smooth-talking charlatans have gone out into the world preaching and teaching a false doctrine, denying the coming of Jesus in the flesh. By the way, just a little parenthesis here. In 1 John, he said they denied that Jesus came in the flesh. Past tense. In 2 John, he says they are denying the coming of Jesus in the flesh. Now, is there significance to that slight change in using a past tense verb and now using a participle, one that is ongoing? Yes, I think it is, because he is making the point that Jesus, of the truth of the incarnation, that it was true then, it is true now, and it will be true for eternity. Amen. That Jesus came in the flesh. But because of these smooth-talking charlatans, John says, watch yourselves so that you may not lose what we have worked for, but may win a full reward. Church, it is vitally important that we watch ourselves, that we be on guard. Now, I'm not talking about living your life in fear that something may bad happen or that the devil may get a hold of you in some way or you may follow, but we have to be aware. We have to watch ourselves. We have to be on our guard because Satan is the great deceiver. He is a liar. He is a thief. who comes to steal and to kill and destroy. And John has already placed these false teachers firmly in that camp. He called them the deceiver and the antichrist. So what is it that John is suggesting that they might lose? He says, watch yourself so that you may not lose what we have worked for. What is it that they might lose? Now, there are some who believe he is saying they might lose their salvation, that if they follow these false teachers, they're going to lose their salvation. In my understanding of salvation as a Baptist, I believe that the only people who can lose their salvation are those who never truly had salvation. Jesus said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. So it is possible for someone to say that they are a follower of Jesus, to maybe even believe that they are a follower of Jesus, but not everyone, he says, who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who what? Does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Amen. And to put that in the context of where we are in 2 John, who is the one who does the will of God? It is a person who knows the truth, walks in the truth, and abides in the truth. Brings us right back full circle to where we are. Those who remain with the teaching of Jesus, they are the ones who will receive the reward of the fullness of our salvation. And again, just a reminder that we tend to think of salvation as that thing that happened back then. That on this particular date, I was saved. And that is true. There was a particular point in your life and in my life where we placed our faith in Jesus Christ and received that great transaction of grace. We became a child of God. But it didn't end there. Because I don't know about you, but I did not become like Jesus when I got saved. In fact, if you spend a lot of time with me, you'd realize I'm still not like Jesus in so many different ways. And so I am still in the process of being saved. It is an ongoing kind of thing. That's why it is important for us to realize the coming of Jesus in the flesh. In the past, in the present, and in the future. And so that reward, yes, it is our salvation in the past, it is our salvation in the present, and it is also our salvation when we are glorified with Him. Amen. Man, isn't God good to us? Amen. But John wrote about losing what we worked for. Losing what we worked for. Now we know that we don't work for our salvation, right? Jesus worked for our salvation. Jesus worked for our salvation. We don't work for our salvation. So what was it that they worked for? Now, I can't be 100% sure on this, but I'm about 99.99999% sure. That's about as good as I can get. I believe that he is talking about the robust, healthy nature of the church that he and others worked so hard to establish. The work of the gospel that took place in that community. And can I tell you, I don't know a single pastor anywhere who is worth his salt who does not feel painfully and deeply when the work suffers. One of the great joys of my life has been to maintain some level of contact with my former pastorates. Not to the point where their current pastors feel like their former pastors looking over their shoulders. But I've had the privilege to go back and preach. I've had the privilege to go and actually lead one of the churches that I served years ago in a revitalization consultation, trying to help them to get back to being a healthy, robust church. And can I tell you, when I look at a church that is doing well and they've not lost ground, they're continuing the work of the kingdom, they are abiding in theological and moral and relational truth, they are made up of real deal Christians, can I tell you as a pastor, that thrills my soul. Amen. Because it validates the work that the Lord did in that place through His servants. It doesn't validate me, it validates the work of the Lord in that place. And that's what John is talking about here. But there are other churches who have not done that. They just haven't. Instead, they've gone backward. They've lost ground, and it breaks my heart. They've lost what we all worked for. So, church, just understand, it is essential that we abide in the truth, theological truth, moral truth, and relational truth, so that we can avoid the danger of going back, of losing ground. Abiding in the truth will help us avoid the danger of going back. It will also help us avoid the danger of going ahead. I got to tell you a funny story. I was serving my very first church, and I believe it was a Saturday afternoon, and we had a funeral. And so the funeral home was in town about 7 miles, and the burial was going to be at a family cemetery that was about 10 miles out of town. And for whatever reason on this particular day, the sheriff's department did not send a car to lead the way for us. So if you think about funeral processions, it's typically the law enforcement, the pastor, the hearse, the pallbearers, the family, and everybody else. So if there's no sheriff's deputy to lead the way, guess who's leading the way? Me. Well, it was a Saturday afternoon. I knew where I was going. That wasn't a problem. And it was going to be about a 12 to 13, maybe even because funeral processions drive fairly slowly. It was maybe up to 15 minutes. So I thought, Alabama's playing basketball. I'm going to listen to the Bama basketball game while I drive out. There's nobody else in the car. You know, it doesn't matter. I could listen to music or I could listen to a basketball game. So I turn on the basketball game. And I'm just driving along, listening to the basketball game, driving along, listening to the basketball game, driving along, listening to the basketball game, and I look in the rearview mirror, and there is no funeral procession. I had gone ahead. I left them behind. And so when I did that, I had to just kind of stop and wait for them to catch up. The mistake the false teachers made was that they went ahead. They ran ahead of the truth. Look at what John writes there in verse 9, the very first part. He says, everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ does not have God. I'm glad he didn't say everyone who goes on ahead of the funeral procession and leaves them behind does not have God. I'd be in trouble. But it's much more serious than just getting ahead of a procession that you were supposed to be leading. Danny Akin said this. He said, the spiritual know-it-alls have run on ahead and left both the Son and the Father behind. That's the danger. And you know, for more than a century, and it may have gone on before then, but for more than a century, those of us who believe the Bible, those of us who abide in theological and moral and relational truth, we have been told by some others, even within Christianity, that we're too narrow-minded. That the world has changed since the Bible was written. And so we have to understand the Bible, not in the sense of its original context, but we need to interpret the Bible in the sense of today's context. They've told us, well, they've got a better way of looking at truth. And that if the church is going to survive, we've got to get with the times. I want to put a little parenthesis here. There are things about getting with the times that are absolutely necessary. In fact, we discussed some of those at our leadership summit this past Friday. But hear me. There is nothing, absolutely nothing about theological truth or moral truth or relational truth that needs to be modernized. Amen. Nothing. What was true then is true now, and it will be true into eternity. Amen. What was right then is right now and will be right into eternity. What is wrong then is wrong now and will be wrong into eternity. Amen. And oh yeah, don't forget, we were told to love one another then, we are told to love one another now, and we are told to love one another all the way into eternity. Amen. None of that has changed. But progressives would say that, well, if we just made our truth a little more flexible, if our truth wasn't quite so offensive, then we could prosper. Well, can I tell you that if our truth were more flexible, it wouldn't be truth? And if our truth were not offensive, it wouldn't be truth? But that was the message of the false teachers in the early church. We got a better way. Y'all need to follow us so you can understand this better way. And I just wonder how many churches across America are struggling right now because they're trying to bend God's truth to fit what the world wants to hear. We see it with those who want to declare right what God has declared sin. But I would suggest to you that nowhere is this more evident than when it comes to people's beliefs about the exclusivity of Christ when it comes to salvation. The Gospel of John, chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life. No one, there are no exceptions. No one comes to the Father except through me. Amen. I have been told before, actually by a church staff member. He didn't stay a staff member very long. But I've been told by a church staff member that to make that statement is arrogant. To make the statement that there is only one way for salvation is arrogant, and it is offensive. But Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. So look then at what John said in the second half of verse 9. Whoever abides in the teaching of Christ. What is the teaching of Christ? I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Whoever abides in the teaching of Christ has both the Father and the Son. Or as Eugene Peterson put it, anyone who gets so progressive in his thinking that he walks out on the teaching of Christ also walks out on God. But whoever stays with the teaching of Christ stays faithful to both the Father and the Son. Now, here's the thing about progressive theology. Warren Wiersbe wrote, progressive theology that denies Christ is not progressive at all. It is regressive. All the way back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 1, when the serpent asked, did God actually say? See, that's the beginning of it all. When we begin to doubt truth, the question that we are asking is the same question that the devil asked the woman in the garden. Did God actually say that? Abiding in the truth will help you avoid the danger of going back, the danger of going ahead, and the danger of going with. After all, that's the goal of anyone who seeks to lead. They want you to go with them. As a pastor, as your leader, your spiritual, I want you to go with me. John wanted the church to go with him. Indeed, he expected them to go with him. But the false teachers wanted the same thing. They wanted believers to go with. So John gives this stern directive. Verse 10, he says, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or give him any greeting. Now that seems harsh, doesn't it? Don't receive him into your house. By the way, house was the church because the church met in homes. Okay, I can understand that, but do not give him a greeting? I mean, what's up with that? Well, first let's look at what this teaching is. He says, anyone who comes to you and does not bring this teaching is the teaching of the gospel that is based on the truth of who Jesus is. Fully God, fully man. The way, the truth, and the life. That's the teaching John was referencing because that was the immediate issue of the church there meeting in Ephesus. But I would suggest that it holds true for any of the essential theological truths of the Christian faith, as well as moral truth and relational truth. John said, don't let them in the house. Don't let them in the house. Don't give them a platform to spew their lies. But then he added, or give him any greeting, for whoever greets him takes part in his wicked ways. Wow. So let me be clear. John is not giving the church permission to exercise spiritual and theological arrogance. He's not giving permission for that. He is not saying that the church should exclude people who don't think like them on every issue. Let me give you an example. There are primary theological truths. We talked about those when we talked about knowing the truth. There are secondary theological truths. And then there are tertiary. And when you get down to the tertiary things, we could have a conversation among ourselves and say, I don't really see it like that. I have a different understanding. John's not talking about that. He's talking about the big stuff. He's talking about the important stuff, the stuff that says if you don't believe this, you cannot really call yourself a Christian. That's what he's talking about. What he is saying is that when you give someone a platform and offer them a blessing, that's what a greeting is. It's actually a blessing of their work. You are validating their testimony. John says, don't do it. Don't do it. When I served as pastor at First Baptist in Talladega, one Sunday night I get up to preach and I look out and there sitting in the back of the worship center are a couple of Mormon missionaries. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's never happened to me before. By the way, it's never happened to me since. So I had no idea why they were there. Service was over. I went back and said, glad you're here. That was the extent of it. They came back again. And I'm thinking, they're going to get saved. But then, they came to the church during the week. And what I had discovered after they came back the second time, and we were talking about it in the office, we discovered that the reason they were coming to church on Sunday night was because they had targeted a young lady who worked at the church. And they had found out that she worked at the church, so they thought that she would be at the church, and they were looking for common ground to be able to lure her into their false teaching. So they show up at the church, at the office, and I hear them as they come into the office, so I slide out of the office and I put my arm around them. I said, y'all walk with me. And they said, what's up? And I said, you're not coming in here to talk to her. You're not going to do it. That's what John's talking about. You're not going to come in here and twist truth to suit what you teach when what you teach would lead her straight to hell. You're not going to do it. Not here. Now, I was nice about it. You don't have to be a jerk to stand for the truth. Although I would question that if you look at social media. By the way, I would have done the same thing for a representative of a church that denied moral truth or relational truth. I mean, why would we offer a platform to anyone or a blessing upon anyone who, I don't know, let's just pick a hot topic for today, who thinks that gender identity is fluid? That's not truth. I don't care how much the news media tells you it's truth. I don't care how much TV shows tell you it's truth. I even went to see my doctor the other day who works for one of the church-related hospitals, and the questionnaire said, what gender were you assigned at birth? I wasn't assigned a gender at birth. I was created a gender in the womb. They recognized my gender when I came out. It can't change. So if there were a group, and by the way, there are some progressive mainline churches who believe, they say, well, we got to get with the times, and so that's, I'm not going to do business with those folks. Just not going to. Not going to give them a platform, not going to give them a blessing. I wouldn't offer a platform or encouragement to any teacher or church that stood for the right thing, but was absolutely hateful in doing it. I couldn't remember the name of the church. I think it's in Kansas that kind of made a name for themselves by being hateful. I couldn't remember it, so I Googled Hateful Midwest Baptist Church. I wish they were not Baptist, but they are. They're not Southern Baptist, but I Googled Hateful Midwest Baptist Church. Boom, there they are. Number one on the list. Westboro Baptist Church. Now they stand for the right thing. They stand for the right thing. They're standing on the truth of human sexuality. One man, one woman, married. That's the truth, and they're standing on the truth. But they forgot the truth that says, love one another. Amen. You can't, you got to have both. This is not a pick 'em and choose 'em how you want it. I'll give you another example. I would not offer a platform or a blessing upon any teacher or church who advocates racism in any direction. Whether it's whites being racist against blacks, or blacks being racist against whites, or whites and blacks being racist against Hispanics or Asians or anybody else. If that's who you are, we ain't doing business with each other. Because the Bible teaches something very different. Giving a false teacher a platform and a blessing is going along with that false teacher. Basically, it's this: failing to take a stand equals partnership and cooperation. And again, this sermon is going out over YouTube and Facebook. I don't know who's going to see it. I don't know who's going to hear it. But somebody might see it and might hear it, and their reaction is going to be, you narrow-minded, arrogant Baptist. They'd probably put in there ignorant on top of that. They probably wouldn't be wrong on that regard. But because that is out there, those of us in this room, those of us who are trying to know the truth and walk in the truth and abide in the truth, we get this tension, don't we? We get this tension that goes on. For us to embrace at least some form of progressivism so that we don't seem intolerant or seem to be backwards. And I can tell you that as we have moved into the 21st century, that tension has only gotten stronger. Not only are we living in a post-Christian culture, but we now have the ability to instantly connect and instantly say whatever it is that we want to say through the wonderful thing called the internet. So hear me. Now, more than ever, it is imperative that the 21st century church know the truth, walk in the truth, and abide in the truth. Theological truth, moral truth, and do not forget relational truth. Because you can know the truth and walk in the truth and abide in the truth without sounding hateful or intolerant. It's not only possible, it is imperative. As Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 23, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. For the sake of the gospel. We know the truth. We walk in the truth. We abide in the truth. And the most precious act of loving one another that any of us could do at any point is sharing the gospel of Jesus with someone who does not know that truth. Father, I want to thank you today for the truth of your word. Father, I want to thank you that you have called us to be your sons and your daughters. And God, as we abide in the truth of your word, theological truth and moral truth, and maybe even more importantly, relational truth, God, I pray that you would teach us to love one another, those who are a part of the family and those who are not yet a part of the family, for the sake of the gospel. In Jesus' name, amen.